Ryan Reynolds is 49 now. The public version of him still works. Quick smile, fast jokes, a man who seems permanently in control of the room. The voice hasn't changed much. The timing is still sharp. The brand is intact. But if you slow the footage down, if you strip away the edits, something else starts to show. The pace of his life hasn't relaxed. It's accelerated. The workload hasn't softened. It's multiplied. The humor hasn't disappeared, but it's doing more work than it used to, covering more ground, holding more weight. This is the contradiction. A man who built a career on being effortlessly likable now operates inside a structure that requires constant output, constant presence, constant maintenance. The image looks light. The system behind it is not. Reynolds didn't grow up inside that system. He came from something quieter, more rigid, less forgiving. He was born in Vancouver, Canada, the youngest of 4 brothers. His father, James Reynolds, worked as a food wholesaler and had a background in law enforcement. His mother, Tammy Reynolds, worked in retail. The household wasn't chaotic in the dramatic sense. It was controlled, structured. Conversations were not always open. Emotions were not always encouraged. Ryan Reynolds has described his childhood as tense. Not violent in a way that makes headlines, but psychologically tight. The kind of environment where you learn early to read the room, to anticipate tone shifts, to adjust your behavior before something escalates. That kind of upbringing produces a specific skill set: awareness, timing, and the ability to deflect. Humor, in that context, isn't entertainment. It's strategy. Reynolds learned how to use it early, not as a performance but as a shield. If a moment felt uncomfortable, he could redirect it. If tension started to build, he could break it. Over time, that instinct became automatic. It wasn't something he turned on. It was something that stayed on. By his teenage years, Reynolds wasn't an obvious candidate for stardom. He wasn't the most disciplined student. He wasn't particularly focused. In fact, by his own account, he struggled academically and dropped out of college after a short time. The direction wasn't clear. There wasn't a defined path forward. What he did have was access to the local acting scene. Vancouver, even then, had a working television industry. Small roles, low-budget productions, steady work if you could stay consistent. Reynolds started there. His first notable role came in the early 1990s with the teen soap opera Hillside, also known as 15. It wasn't high profile. It didn't create immediate momentum, but it gave him something more important: routine, set life, repetition, the process of showing up, delivering lines, adjusting performance based on feedback. For a while, that was enough. But the transition from working actor to successful actor didn't happen quickly. Through his early 20s, Reynolds moved between minor television roles and small film appearances. The pattern was unstable. Work would come, then disappear. Momentum would build slightly, then stall. This period is often compressed in hindsight. In reality, it was long. Years of inconsistent income, uncertain direction, and the constant pressure of comparison. Other actors breaking through. Other careers accelerating. Reynolds staying in place. He has spoken about the anxiety during that time. Not the cinematic version. The practical version. Worry about money. Worry about relevance. Worry about whether the effort would ever convert into something sustainable. At one point, he considered quitting. That moment matters, because it sits in direct contrast to the public image that would come later. The version of Ryan Reynolds that audiences recognize now appears inevitable. Confident. Inevitable success. But the early trajectory didn't support that narrative. It looked fragile. The shift began in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Reynolds started landing roles that leaned into his natural timing. Fast dialogue, sarcastic delivery, characters who existed slightly outside the emotional center of the story. Films like Van Wilder positioned him as a comedic lead. The performance wasn't drastically different from his earlier work, but the visibility changed everything. For the first time, Reynolds wasn't just working. He was being noticed. That recognition came with a new kind of pressure. Not survival pressure, but identity pressure. Once an actor becomes associated with a specific tone or persona, the industry starts reinforcing it. Casting decisions narrow. Expectations solidify. Reynolds became the funny guy. At first, that label worked in his favor. It created opportunities. It made him marketable. But it also limited range. Offers started to cluster around similar characters, similar rhythms, similar arcs. He tried to break out of that pattern. Took roles that leaned more dramatic. Some worked. Many didn't. The inconsistency continued, just at a higher level. Bigger projects, but not always better outcomes. There's a specific kind of frustration that comes from partial success. Not failure, but not stability either. Enough visibility to stay relevant, not enough consistency to feel secure. Reynolds lived in that space for years. During this period, his personal life began intersecting more directly with his public identity. Relationships became part of the narrative. His engagement and later marriage to actress Scarlett Johansson placed him inside a different category of celebrity, one where private life becomes public currency. The relationship, by most accounts, was guarded. Both actors were protective of their privacy, but the attention was constant. Interviews, speculation, analysis of body language, timelines, and public appearances. For someone already managing anxiety, that level of scrutiny adds another layer. Not just performing on screen, but managing perception off-screen. Deciding what to reveal, what to withhold, how to maintain control over a narrative that is constantly being reshaped by external voices. Reynolds handled it the same way he handled tension as a child. With humor. Deflection. Controlled disclosure. But humor used that way has a cost. It creates distance. It keeps things moving, but it doesn't always resolve what's underneath. Professionally, the real turning point came much later than most people assume. Not with his early comedies. Not with the initial wave of recognition. Came with risk. The Deadpool project had been circulating in Hollywood for years. Studios were hesitant. The character was unconventional. The tone didn't fit neatly into existing superhero frameworks. There were concerns about audience reception, about rating restrictions, about marketability. Reynolds pushed for it anyway. That push wasn't just creative. It was strategic. By that point in his career, he had enough experience to understand the limitations of waiting for the right role to appear. Sometimes it had to be built. The development process was slow. Times it stalled completely. Funding issues, script revisions, studio hesitation. The kind of delays that can quietly kill a project. Then came the leaked test footage. A short sequence that demonstrated exactly what the film could be. Violent, self-aware, deliberately irreverent. The reaction was immediate. Online support surged. The studio reconsidered. Production moved forward. But even then, it wasn't a guaranteed success. The budget was relatively modest compared to other superhero films. The rating limited certain audiences. The tone was risky. Reynolds didn't just act in the film. He was deeply involved in shaping it. Tone, pacing, dialogue. The humor that had once been a defensive mechanism became a defining creative tool. When Deadpool was released, the response was overwhelming. Commercial success. Cultural impact. A clear shift in Reynolds' position within the industry. From that point on, the narrative changed. He wasn't just a working actor anymore. He was a central figure. A producer. A brand. But that shift didn't erase the earlier patterns. It amplified them. The same instincts that helped him navigate a tense childhood, awareness, timing, humor as a tool, now operated on a much larger scale. Interviews became performances. Social media became an extension of his voice. Every public interaction contributed to a carefully maintained image. That image is effective. It works. It sells. But it also requires maintenance. And maintenance over time becomes a form of labor that doesn't stop. By the time Ryan Reynolds reached his late 40s, the structure of his life had become more complex than the public version suggests. Acting was no longer the only focus. Business ventures, production responsibilities, brand partnerships, each one demanding attention, strategy, and output. The workload expanded. The pace increased. From the outside, it looks like success scaling upward. From the inside, it can feel like pressure scaling with it. That's where the story starts to shift. Not dramatically, not in a way that produces headlines, but in small, observable changes. The way interviews are paced, the way humor is deployed more frequently, more precisely, the way personal disclosures are calibrated. Ryan Reynolds didn't lose control of his career. He built something that requires constant control, and that distinction matters. Because the same mechanisms that help him rise, deflection, precision, relentless engagement, don't automatically switch off once stability is achieved. They continue. They adapt. They become part of the system. By the end of his early rise, Reynolds had achieved what he set out to do: visibility, success, influence. But the foundation of that success was built on patterns formed much earlier. Patterns that don't disappear just because the circumstances improve. They stay. And as his career moved into its most successful phase, those patterns would be tested in ways that were far more complex than anything he faced during his early years. By the time Ryan Reynolds entered his mid-30s, the structure of his life had shifted, but not in a way that simplified anything. The success was visible. The recognition was measurable. But internally, the system was becoming more complicated, not less. His marriage to Scarlett Johansson in 2008 placed him inside a high-visibility partnership that functioned under constant observation. Two careers operating at the same altitude. Two public identities that needed to coexist without overlapping too much. It was controlled, deliberate, and largely private. There were no frequent public appearances designed to feed attention. No oversharing. But that kind of restraint doesn't eliminate pressure. It redistributes it. Reynolds has spoken in fragments about that period. Not with dramatic language, but with small, precise admissions. The difficulty of maintaining identity inside a relationship where both individuals are constantly being defined externally. The challenge of separating performance from reality when both careers depend on perception. The marriage ended in 2011. No public collapse. No extended scandal cycle. Just a controlled statement and a quiet separation. From the outside, it looked clean, efficient. But the absence of visible chaos doesn't mean the absence of impact. Reynolds moved forward quickly, at least structurally. Within a year, he married Blake Lively. The dynamic was different, lighter in tone, more publicly integrated. Their interactions, interviews, social media exchanges, introduced a version of Reynolds that felt more open, but also more performative. The humor intensified. It became sharper, more constant, more embedded in every interaction. What had once been a tool used situationally started to function as a default mode. Interviews turned into rapid exchanges of controlled spontaneity. Social media posts were constructed to appear casual but were precisely timed, precisely worded. The audience responded positively. The brand strengthened. But there's a mechanical side to that kind of consistency. Humor at that level, deployed that frequently, requires monitoring. It requires awareness of timing, tone, and audience reaction in real time. It becomes less about expression and more about calibration. At the same time, Reynolds' career reached a critical intersection. Before Deadpool, there were missteps that are often minimized in retrospect. The most notable was Green Lantern, a high-budget production positioned as a franchise launch. The expectations were clear. Establish Reynolds as a leading figure in a long-term superhero series. The outcome didn't match the projection. The film underperformed critically and commercially. The reception was negative, sometimes aggressively so. Reynolds, as the central figure, absorbed a significant portion of that response. Not entirely fair, but consistent with how the industry assigns responsibility. For an actor already managing underlying anxiety, that kind of public failure doesn't just pass. It lingers. It reframes decision-making. It creates hesitation. Reynolds didn't collapse under it. He adjusted. He began to take on roles that leaned further into controlled risk. Smaller projects. More specific tones. Films that didn't rely entirely on broad commercial appeal. Buried is one example. A contained performance, minimal setting, high dependence on emotional precision. It didn't dominate the box office, but it recalibrated how he was perceived within the industry. Then came the long, uncertain development of Deadpool. This wasn't a standard studio progression. The project stalled multiple times. Scripts were rewritten. Funding hesitated. The character itself, violent, self-referential, disruptive, didn't align with established superhero formulas. Reynolds stayed attached anyway. That persistence is often framed as confidence. It wasn't purely that. It was also necessity. By that point, he understood that waiting for the industry to redefine him wasn't a reliable strategy. He had to force the shift. When the test footage leaked and the online response surged, it created leverage. The studio moved forward, but cautiously. Lower budget, tighter constraints, fewer safety nets. Production moved quickly. The tone was deliberate, irreverent, self-aware, aggressive in its humor. Reynolds' performance wasn't a departure from his established style. It was an amplification of it, pushed to its most extreme and controlled form. The release in 2016 changed everything. Commercial success was immediate. Critical response was strong. More importantly, the film redefined the boundaries of its genre. It proved that a different tone could work at scale. Reynolds became inseparable from the character. That's where the complexity increases. Success at that level doesn't just elevate, it locks certain elements in place. The audience expectation solidifies. The industry response narrows again, but this time around a successful formula. Reynolds leaned into it. He expanded beyond acting. Production roles increased. Marketing strategies became more intricate. He wasn't just participating in the system anymore. He was actively shaping it. At the same time, his personal life appeared stable. Marriage to lively. Children. A controlled, curated version of domestic normalcy presented through selective public moments. But stability at that scale requires maintenance. Reynolds has been open, in a measured way, about his struggles with anxiety. Not as a headline, but as a recurring detail. He has described experiencing it from a young age. Persistent, underlying, not always tied to specific events. What changed over time wasn't the presence of anxiety, but the environment around it. Early in his career, anxiety was tied to uncertainty, work, money, relevance. Later, it became tied to maintenance, performance, expectations, continuity. He has described preparing extensively before interviews, running scenarios in his head, anticipating questions, controlling outcomes as much as possible. The humor that audiences see as spontaneous often comes from that preparation. It's structured. That structure creates reliability. It also creates dependency. Because once a system like that is built, stepping outside of it becomes difficult. The risk of silence, of unpredictability, of not controlling the moment, those become variables that are harder to manage. Reynolds didn't slow down after Deadpool. He accelerated. Sequels, production deals, business ventures. His involvement with Aviation American Gin and later the sale of that stake. His ownership role in Wrexham A.F.C. alongside Rob McElhenney. Each project added another layer of responsibility, another set of expectations. From the outside, it reads as diversification. Smart business decisions. Expansion beyond acting. From the inside, it increases cognitive load. More decisions. More visibility. More points of potential failure. Reynolds manages that through the same mechanisms he's always used. Control, timing, humor. The difference is scale. The system is larger now. The stakes are higher. The margin for error is narrower. Even his public relationship with Lively operates within that structure. Their exchanges, playful, ironic, often self-deprecating, function as both genuine interaction and brand reinforcement. It's effective. It humanizes both of them. Keeps the audience engaged. But it's also consistent. Predictable in its unpredictability. There are very few moments where Reynolds appears unfiltered in a way that isn't already accounted for. That's not accidental. As his career reached its peak, the separation between personal and professional became less distinct. Not because he chose to expose more, but because the system he operates within integrates both automatically. A comment becomes content. A private moment becomes narrative. A joke becomes a headline. Managing that requires constant awareness. And constant awareness, sustained over years, has a cost. By his late 40s, Reynolds had achieved a level of control that very few actors reach. He could initiate projects, shape them, distribute them, and market them with a degree of independence. But control at that level doesn't eliminate pressure. Concentrates it. Every decision reflects back directly. There are fewer buffers. Fewer places to redirect responsibility. Reynolds doesn't show strain in a conventional way. There are no public breakdowns. No visible collapses. The system holds. But the indicators are subtle. The precision of his responses. The frequency of humor. The consistency of tone across different platforms and contexts. These aren't signs of instability. They're signs of continuous regulation. And regulation, when it becomes constant, shifts from being a tool to being a requirement. That's the environment Reynolds operates in at his peak. Highly successful, highly controlled, highly maintained, but also highly dependent on the very mechanisms that were originally developed to navigate something much smaller, much earlier. By the time Ryan Reynolds reached 49, the visible structure of his life looked stable, calculated even. A long-term marriage, multiple children, sustained career relevance, financial security that removed the need for risk. On paper, the trajectory resolved cleanly. But the internal mechanics didn't simplify. They became more embedded. Reynolds doesn't operate like someone winding down. There's no visible deceleration. The projects continue. The businesses expand. The public presence remains consistent, almost uninterrupted. What changes instead is the density of everything behind it. Because at this stage, he isn't building momentum anymore, he's maintaining it. Maintenance is different from growth. Growth allows for fluctuation. Maintenance demands consistency. It requires holding a line, not just reaching one. And holding a line over years, decades, creates a different kind of pressure. Less visible, more constant. Reynolds has constructed a life where multiple systems run simultaneously. Acting, production, business investments, brand partnerships, sports ownership. Each one with its own expectations, timelines, and risks. None of them passive. Take his involvement with Wrexham A.F.C. From the outside, it's framed as a passion project. A narrative about revival, community, and underdog success. And that's part of it. But operationally, it's another layer of responsibility. Public visibility tied to performance that he doesn't directly control. Outcomes influenced by dozens of variables. Players, management, finances, fan expectations. Every win amplifies the story. Every loss complicates it. Reynolds remains publicly optimistic, engaged, present, but the structure itself doesn't allow disengagement. Once attached, the narrative continues whether he actively participates or not. The same applies to his business ventures. The sale of his stake in Aviation American Gin was widely reported as a success. Financially, it was. Strategically, it validated his approach, integrating personality with product, humor with marketing. But it also reinforced a model that requires replication. Once a strategy works at that level, the expectation isn't to stop. It's to do it again and again. Each new venture carries the weight of the previous success. The margin for failure narrows, not because failure becomes impossible, but because the contrast becomes sharper. Reynolds continues to move within that system, expanding, adjusting, refining. But the question shifts from, can he succeed? To, what does sustaining this look like over time? Because the cost of sustained performance isn't always external. Reynolds has been consistent in acknowledging his anxiety, but always within controlled boundaries. He discusses it in interviews, but with structure, with framing. It's never chaotic disclosure. It's managed. He has described experiencing intrusive thoughts before appearances, running through worst-case scenarios, preparing responses in advance, rehearsing outcomes that may never occur, simply to reduce uncertainty. At 49, that pattern hasn't disappeared. If anything, the environment reinforces it. More visibility means more variables. More variables mean more preparation. More preparation increases reliance on control mechanisms. From the outside, this reads as professionalism, discipline, reliability. From the inside, it can feel like constant pre-engagement. A state where the mind doesn't fully disengage because the next interaction, the next expectation, the next performance is always approaching. Reynolds rarely presents stillness publicly. Even his moments of rest are framed. Family photos, controlled glimpses of domestic life with Blake Lively and their children. The tone is warm, often humorous, intentionally relatable. But it's also selective. There's no unfiltered access. No extended absence from the system. That consistency is part of the brand. But consistency at that level requires repetition. And repetition, sustained long enough, becomes automatic. Less conscious choice, more default behavior. This is where the idea of a sad reality becomes less dramatic and more structural. There's no single event that defines it. No collapse. No visible decline. Instead, it's the accumulation of small, persistent conditions. The need to remain present. The expectation to remain engaging. The requirement to remain controlled. Reynolds doesn't appear trapped by these conditions. He operates effectively within them. But effectiveness doesn't eliminate cost. It manages it. Aging introduces another variable. At 49, the industry begins to shift its expectations subtly. Roles change. Narratives adjust. The physical demands of certain performances increase in difficulty. Not impossibility, but effort. Recovery takes longer. Scheduling becomes tighter to compensate. Reynolds continues to perform at a high level, particularly within the Deadpool framework. But even there, the demands are specific. Physical conditioning, precise timing, sustained energy across long production periods. The character works because Reynolds can still meet those demands. But the margin narrows. That awareness doesn't need to be stated publicly to exist. It informs decisions quietly. Which projects to pursue, which risks to take, how long to continue at a certain pace. Legacy becomes a more active consideration. Not in the sense of ending, but in the sense of shaping what remains consistent after the pace inevitably changes. Reynolds has already begun that process through production and business structures that can operate independently of his constant presence. But even that requires initial intensity. Building systems that function without you first requires building them with you fully engaged. So the workload doesn't decrease during that transition. It often increases. Reynolds stands at a point where most of his external goals have been met. Recognition, financial security, creative control. The variables that once created instability have largely been resolved. What remains are the internal patterns. The ones formed early. The ones that adapted over time. The ones that proved effective enough to become permanent. Humor as deflection. Control as stability. Preparation as protection. These aren't flaws. They're tools. But tools, when used constantly, shape the way a person experiences everything else. Moments become opportunities for calibration. Conversations become environments to manage. Silence becomes something to fill or anticipate. Reynolds doesn't publicly express dissatisfaction with his life. There's no indication that he regrets the path he took. In many ways, he's optimized it. But optimization has a trade-off. It reduces unpredictability. It increases efficiency. It also narrows the range of unstructured experience. That's the quiet shift. Not from happiness to sadness in a dramatic sense, but from spontaneity to structure. From reaction to anticipation. From expression to management. Ryan Reynolds at 49 isn't a man who lost control. He's a man who built a system that requires him to maintain it. And that maintenance doesn't end when the cameras stop. It extends into how he speaks, how he presents, how he prepares, how he rests. It becomes continuous. The audience sees the result. Consistent, engaging, reliable. The version of him that rarely falters, rarely hesitates, rarely breaks pattern. But behind that version is a process that never fully powers down. That's the part that doesn't trend. That's the part that doesn't get clipped into short videos. That's the part that stays out of frame. And it's the part that defines how he actually lives. Ryan Reynolds built a career on timing, knowing exactly when to speak, when to deflect, when to shift tone. At 49, the timing is still precise. But the system behind it runs constantly. If you've followed his career from the beginning, you've seen the outcomes. The roles, the success, the public moments. What you haven't always seen is the structure holding it all in place. And once you notice it, It's hard to unsee. Because the question isn't whether he succeeded. It's what it takes to keep that success looking effortless, every single day.